A guard stripped a prisoner naked, locked him in a closet, and nobody stopped it, because they'd been told it was science. August 1971. The basement of Stanford's psychology building. I've read the logbook myself, the dates, the times, the clinical notes written as if what was unfolding down there was somehow routine. A young man named Douglas Corpy was on day 2 of his role as a prisoner when they decided he was becoming too much of a problem. So they isolated him, stripped him, put him in solitary confinement in a closet no wider than a broom cupboard. And the guards, ordinary Stanford undergraduates, paid $15 a day. They enforced it without hesitation. This is where the story actually begins, though. Not in the chaos, but in the careful planning. Philip Zimbardo, a psychologist at Stanford, wanted to understand something fundamental about human nature. Are we cruel by nature, or do systems make us cruel? He posted an ad in the local paper. 24 men applied. 24 ordinary college students. No history of violence, no psychological disorders. Just regular people looking to earn some money. Zimbardo divided them randomly. 12 became prisoners. 12 became guards. The other 3 served as administrative staff. He gave the guards mirrored sunglasses and khaki uniforms, nothing fancy, but enough to create distance, anonymity. He told them the rules were simple: maintain order. Everything else was up to them. And here's what I want you to notice. He didn't recruit sadists. He didn't select for cruelty. He selected for ordinariness. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. It didn't. By day 2, the prisoners staged a rebellion, tearing off their identification numbers, barricading themselves in their cells. The guards' response wasn't written down in a manual. There was no script for how to respond, so they improvised. And what they improvised was escalation. They woke the prisoners at 2 a.m. for head counts. They made them do push-ups until they collapsed. They gave them bucket toilets instead of allowing them bathroom access, psychological humiliation disguised as procedure. And the prisoners, they didn't resist. They complied. Some became withdrawn. Others became aggressive. One began to genuinely believe he was a prisoner, not a participant. Now, here's where the experiment reveals something darker than Zimbardo perhaps expected. The guards weren't sadistic. They were normal. Some of them felt uncomfortable with the cruelty. I've seen interviews where they admitted guilt years later. But they didn't stop it. Why? Because the role had become their identity. The uniform, the authority, the permission to act, it had colonized their sense of self. This connects directly to Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil, the idea that atrocities aren't committed by monsters, but by ordinary people who have simply accepted the logic of their role. Arendt witnessed this firsthand during the Nuremberg trials. She watched men who'd orchestrated genocide claim they were just following orders, and she realized something unsettling. They might have been telling the truth, in a way. The Stanford Prison Experiment wasn't just about guards and prisoners. It was about what happens when you remove moral friction from a system. When you create a role, give it authority, and tell people that their job is to maintain order without specifying the limits. Something shifts in the human mind. The rules of normal morality don't disappear. They just get reclassified. But I want to complicate this. The experiment itself became controversial for good reason. Later researchers questioned whether Zimbardo had inadvertently coached the guards toward cruelty, whether he'd allowed his hypothesis to shape the outcome. Some of the guards said they were playing a role, performing what they thought the experiment required. So did the system create the evil, or did the expectation? The answer matters more than you might think. If evil is purely systemic, then changing the system changes behavior. If evil requires complicity, conscious or unconscious, then we each bear responsibility. And that's uncomfortable. It's easier to believe monsters are born, not made. It's harder to ask, what role am I playing right now? What permissions have I granted myself? The Stoics understood this. Epictetus, who lived as a slave, insisted that we always retain choice, not over circumstance, but over assent. We can't always choose our role in the system, but we can choose whether we'll accept the logic it offers us. We can choose to notice when we're being asked to dehumanize someone. We can choose to refuse. The Stanford Prison Experiment lasted 6 days. Zimbardo ended it when a colleague visited and asked him a simple question: would you ever act this way? He realized, in that moment, that he'd become so invested in the experiment that he'd lost sight of the people inside it. The role of researcher had colonized his judgment. Even he wasn't immune. So what's the practical lesson? It's not that systems are evil and we're helpless. It's that we're far more malleable than we'd like to admit. The uniform matters. The authority matters. The permission matters. But so does the moment when someone asks you the right question, the moment when you step outside the role and see it clearly. In your own life, you're wearing multiple uniforms. Employee, parent, friend, social media persona. Each one comes with permissions and expectations, and each one has the potential to make you complicit in things you'd never choose in isolation. The question isn't whether you're capable of evil. Everyone is. The question is, are you paying attention to the role you're playing? This is why the Stanford Prison Experiment still matters. Not because it's a perfect study. It isn't. But because it asks the question that every thoughtful person needs to ask themselves regularly. Under what conditions would I become someone I don't recognize? What role would I need to be given? What permission would I need to be granted? And how would I know the moment it's happening? The Stoics would call this self-examination, premeditatio malorum, or negative visualization. Not to paralyze you with fear, but to sharpen your judgment before you're in the moment. To rehearse your refusal. Because the most dangerous thing about the banality of evil isn't that it's dramatic. It's that it's ordinary. It happens one small compromise at a time, in the spaces between who you think you are and the role you've been given. The prisoners in that Stanford basement were released. The guards went back to being college students. But the experiment didn't end. It just moved into the world. It's happening now, in organizations and institutions everywhere, wherever ordinary people are given permission to act without moral friction. The only real defense is awareness, vigilance, the willingness to step outside the role and ask yourself the hard question. Subscribe for weekly essays on the philosophies that explain human behavior, so you can see your own more clearly.